also access the vertices, the edges, and the polygons. But we're not actually accessing the geometry part. We're accessing the actual flattened part of the geometry in 2D space rather than in 3D space. Because when we're unwrapping a 3D object, we're essentially taking it and making it into a flat object and having it occupy texture space to be able to put textures that we create later on in Photoshop onto the 3D model and have it fit correctly. So I'll just go ahead and turn it on and off. Okay. Now I'm going to open my UVW editor again. And by default, it has this checkerboard background in there. Now, I don't know about a lot of you, but this thing gets annoying to me. And in the many years and decades I've been using 3D Max, I just don't care for this. And traditionally, I would set it up to where this doesn't even show up. But for the intents and purposes of this tutorial, I always leave things as default, just so everybody can see what it is and how to turn off things and make changes to certain things if they want. So what I'll do is I'll click up here where it says checker pattern, brackets, checker, like you need to be told twice. Remove texture, and it just gives us this clean slate to work with. Now the controls to move inside this window are the same as they would be in 3ds Max. Middle mouse button holding down moves this area around. On the PC, holding down Alt and Control and your middle mouse button zooms in and out. Or you can just use your mouse wheel to move in and out, but sometimes you need some fine detail, so you hold down Control and Alt along by holding down your middle mouse button and moving in and out, or back and forth on your mouse. Now also we have things that are down here. We have vertex mode, edge mode, and polygon mode, and we have this also select by element. Well, selecting by element UV toggle is something different that we're not going to go into for this because it tends to get more complicated than just unwrapping a simple box. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and stick to polygons. And I've always asked in class, how many polygons do I have selected here? Well, in actuality, if I go ahead and make this window just a bit smaller, excuse me a second, my computer keeps freezing up. It's not render. Okay, let's click this again. There we go. Remove texture. Let's just make this smaller. Okay. That's because I do have one polygon selected. But if I were to hold down Control on the PC and click my mouse and select more, you'll notice they're all occupying the exact same space. Now in class, I actually had everybody put an actual image on their box. But in this case, I'm not going to go ahead and do that because I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do a custom texture from the get-go in the second part of this video. So what I need to do is I'm going to show you the simplest way to actually unwrap something, and that is first of all to divide all these objects or polygons into single objects that you could then assemble together and make your unwrap. So in this case, I've got them all selected, and that's good. I'll just go ahead and click and window around. Let's maximize this window a bit so everybody can kind of see. I apologize if on YouTube that these tend to be a bit smaller, but you know, if I made them HD, yeah, they'd be too big. So let's keep them small. So just by hitting Control A, I selected all the polygon faces, as you can see right there. And I'll go up to the different types of mapping, but for this case, I'm just going to go over what I went over in class, and that is normal mapping. And normal mapping has a few different definitions with working in 3D. In this case, it just means flattening out squares. It's pretty much all you need to know, because the technicalities behind it are just a little too intensive for beginners. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and do the box mapping. And it's not called that because we're specifically unwrapping a box. It's called that because of the way mathematically it takes the polygons and presents them in a flattened space around a box area. That also gets mathematically kind of complicated, and it's something that you grow used to using with time because you learn how to assemble more complicated, or excuse me, you learn how to disassemble some complicated 3D meshes and actually make them uh, work in 3D space by flattening them out and converting them into 2D space and blah blah blah. It goes on and on and on. I'm not going to bother you with that because for the example of this box, the idea is to just show how to fit it in that gray square we had right here. Create a custom simple texture for it and put it on there. So I'm just going to click OK, and it assembles this, and this is the quickest way for me to show you the examples. Now, like when we're modeling, we have our hotkeys to access vertices being one on your keyboard, edges being 2 on your keyboard, 3 being borders on your keyboard, 4 being polygons, and 5 being elements. It's the same, but only 1, 2, and 3 when working in your UVW editor here. 1, as you'll notice down here where it lights up, 1 is vertex mode, as you can see the vertices. Whoa! 2 being edge mode, you can see the edges. 3 being faces, because we don't actually refer to them. Um, they're not technically polygons at this point because a polygonal space cannot exist in a 2D space. I don't want to go into that. That's too overly complicated. But I am going to be working in edge mode, so the hotkey for that is 2 on my keyboard. Now you'll notice some of them, wherever I click, if I select multiple, some of them are red. The ones I selected are red, but the corresponding ones that connect to those are actually highlighted in blue, not green. So if I select this one, its corresponding one is down here. And just for an example, I'll pull this one up next to it and I'll zoom in on it. And I'll go back to edge mode and you'll see that, let me move this a little more so you can see better. So by selecting that edge, you'll see its corresponding edge is right there. Now, it used to be to where we used to have to weld all the vertices and edges manually, but now we don't have to do that. We haven't had to do that for many, many years. What we can do is go ahead and just right click on this and we have something called stitch selected. Now rather than click on the actual word, I've been teaching you to, when you notice these little boxes that are next to it, to access these boxes. It's not so much with stitch selected in the Uvw Editor, but it does give you some tools that you can use, and I'll go ahead and open that box to show them to you. Let's pull them in here. Now we can align these things by clusters or scale the clusters. I'm not going to bother you about what they are cluster-wise because it has to do with how it's arranged around a grid and spatial relationship with the actual geometry. I'm not going to bother you with that. But just know that if you have anything that's not a 90-degree angle, the bias here will be minus or plus 5 degrees off whatever this amount is. You notice my screen is flickering over here as I change that. Now, what I tend to do is just keep it at 0, no matter what. But by default, it's 0.5. So you'll notice it actually welded that face and that edge together to that one. So I'm going to go back to edge mode by clicking 2 on my keyboard. I'm going to select another edge, and let's see, where's its corresponding buddy? Right down there. And I don't have to take this and drag it up here. I can just right click from anywhere and click on stitch selected, and it's going to keep doing it. Stitch selected. Where's that one? Stitch selected. Stitch selected. Okay. Now, a lot of you in class noticed that this may be different than what you did before, where we had another piece up here. We can select things and actually detach the edge vertices and put it up here if we'd like. See? So maybe I'll do that just because it was what you were used to seeing. Now, while we were in class, I was letting students get away with having this actually skewed like this. That was fine because I wanted you to grasp more the concept of what it was we were doing more than the technique. Now, the box that I selected, and you'll notice this box has scale capabilities, it has rotation capabilities, and it has move capabilities on an individual level. Or you can do this on an individual level. And that hotkey is actually up here, freeform mode. And that enables you to do everything all at once with this cage around there. Convenient tool, yes, but not always the most efficient. Okay, because sometimes you may want to make smaller changes, and this just is not practical. Is what I tend to do is primarily work with move selected sub-object mode up here, to where I can grab things all together, but I lose the ability to have that bounding box with those selection tools on it. Now the hotkeys when you're modeling for the move tool are W, for the rotation tool are E, and for the scale tool is R. And they work the same here in your render window. W moves, E rotates, and R will scale. Remember, if you cycle through R, you're cycling through your different types of scale. Okay? So with that being said, it's best practice, even though we didn't go over this, is to keep these perfectly squared objects, as you see that's over here, as perfect squares. And that can be kind of difficult when you're dealing with something that is not 100% square itself, because everything we create has to fit within inside this box that's already there for us, because this is what our render template will create. So when we go to tools and render template, this is what's actually going to create the render template for us. So let me go ahead and undo this a couple times. So I'm just going to use the scale tool by hitting R on my keyboard. Actually, let me go ahead and there are some new controls in 2012 I'm just not used to, so I'm going to go ahead, just yet I'm not used to. I'm going to go ahead and scale it this way and try and keep them as square as possible. I'm just going to fit it in here. Now it's not going to fit completely, and I understand this, and that's fine, because this is not a square object. Well, I do know for a fact that these will fit in here with no problem. Problem is this extra one won't. Now here's a good practice for you. Let's say this is my in-film model or my in-game model, and this thing here, this polygon on the bottom, will never be seen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and detach this, and I'm going to move this over here. Let's see what I can do with this now. I can select all of these, and I'm going to rotate them 90 degrees. And fit it like that. Now, one thing I did is a typical mistake I see of students. They tend to do this. I scaled all of these, but I did not scale this one. Therefore, this one remains larger, as you can tell, to all of the ones that are there. Now, this becomes a problem because this comes with dealing with pixels. Something that's not going to be seen on your 3D model when it has a texture on it doesn't need any pixels at all, let alone more pixels than the space that is going to be around it. Now, for those of you who do not know what pixels is, I am not going to go into that. You can all go to Wikipedia and find out what a pixel is. I'm not going to bother explaining it. So that little process I did just here, let's undo. And by the way, I was hitting Control Z multiple times. Is they say, well, you know what, if I can't get it to fit, I'll go ahead and just delete that one and do all this. Well, don't do that, okay? It's best to have all your pieces of your boxes using up the same pixel space, than not having enough space whatsoever. Now, professionally, there would be other ways I would go about doing this, but this lesson is not to show you how to create a professional unwrap. It's to show you the techniques that we use to actually do these things and use these tools, okay? I'm going to zoom in up to the top here because you want to make sure none of your geometry goes outside of these gray lines that are here. So I'm going to get it just up to the top. Let's go over here. That one's pretty close to the edge, but it's alright. That one's good. And we have a lot of empty space here. Now just consider that this empty space that you have around here is essentially empty pixel space, and it's wasted. But for the process of this tutorial, it's just to show you how to get this thing into Photoshop to create a very simple texture for this. Texturing becomes extremely complex. Whether you're doing pixel painting in ZBrush or using the painting here in 3ds Max or creating textures for games, film, whatever it is, procedural textures, procedural materials, architectural materials, it gets very complicated. So now that I've got this part out of the way, so what I'm going to do before I go into the next video is actually save this. Always save your project. I'm going to name this one Box Unwrap 1. I always tend to number my things. And then I'm just going to click save. And at this point on, I'm going to let this sit as it is. I'm going to complete this video and move on to the next video because I like to keep them condensed as possible. And that's about it.